You are now listening to the IELTS podcast. Learn from tutors and ex-examiners.
Welcome back to another podcast. In this one we've got Pete again from SplendidSpeaking.com. He's going to give us some advice on the best way to respond to questions and the best type of signpost language to use in the exam. And make sure to go over to IELTSPodcast.com, sign up, because if you had done, you would have got this podcast a lot earlier. And make sure to check out Pete's website at SplendidSpeaking.com, splendid-speaking.com. Great resource if speaking's a challenge for you. Lots of tutorials to follow, lots of great advice to listen to, so definitely check that out. Okay, this is part 2. Here it goes. For the next one, how should the student respond to questions? This is quite an open-ended question.
Okay, well, the first thing I suppose is avoid yes/no answers.
Yes.
Especially if the question is a kind of a yes, it invites a yes/no answer. If the question says something like "do you" or "have you" or "are you," the natural tendency is to say yes or no, or even yes I do or no I don't. Now, I always say to students, think of the examiner. The examiner's sitting there, and they've got to listen to dozens maybe of students go through one interview after the next, and what you want to try and do is make that examiner's job as easy as possible. And one way of doing that is to give them an answer that they can sit back and listen to and relax and wait until you finish, and then they can ask their next question. So the first thing is really avoid kind of yes/no answers. Now, how can you take it forward? Well, on one of the courses that we teach, we've got something that we call the REDS method, REDS. Mm-hmm. And we say that basically R is for reason, E is for example, D is for detail, and S is for speculation. So when the examiner asks you a question, you can say yes I do or no I don't, and then give a reason if it's appropriate. Or it might be that an example's better. It might be if they say, what kind of food do you like to eat? You could say, well, I really like pasta. For example, my favourite meal is spaghetti bolognese, etc. So giving an example is another alternative. Or adding detail. If the examiner asks you where you come from, you could say, I come from, and it might be a very small town like, I don't know, Leighton Buzzard, for example. I come from Leighton Buzzard. It's a small town in the south of England, and you just give a little bit more detail. And finally, speculation is if the examiner asks you a question and you haven't really got an answer to it. So, for example, do you like to do exercise? If the answer is no, I don't really enjoy exercise. And then you can speculate. You can say, I suppose I should do. I imagine if I did, I'd feel better. But no, I don't. So one of those 4, reason, example, detail, or speculation, is a way of extending that answer to another sentence or two.
Right. That's good. That's good. I like it. For the detail, would you recommend students learning, going a bit further than everyday vocabulary? For example, I like Mediterranean food. They could say, I really like chorizo, paella. You know what I mean? Going a bit deeper into more exotic food. Would you recommend that?
There's the topic vocabulary that they should try to learn. Yeah, so if you're talking about food, you should have a kind of a good collection of words that describe your eating habits. If you want to know what kind of food topic vocabulary you to learn, focus on the things that you like or things that you don't like. There's no point learning words that you're not going to talk about, so you could focus on that. But also in terms of the functional language there, you said I really like. Yeah. It's a really good idea to be kind of reflective as you're speaking. Think about what you're saying, and if you think, well, I've just said I like to something else, don't say I like again. Say I adore, or I quite fancy, or So have a collection of functional language that you can use, so you can rotate them so that you can show the examiner you can do more than I like, or I think.
Yeah, that's so true. And there's no shortage either, is there? I love,
No, not at
adore,
all.
I enjoy. Could you tell us your thoughts about signposting language and about using prompts?
It's kind of horses for courses. It depends on the context again, and the kind of presentation you're giving. Quite often when we think about signposting language, we talk about the things that we say at the beginning of a presentation. We'll say things like, this morning I'm going to talk about blah 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 blah. I will start by saying blah 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 blah. Now you're not going to do that in IELTS, because you're not giving that kind of a presentation. So it's a lot more fluid. And so the context for me suggests, as I said earlier, using the questions as prompts. The question prompts become, in a sense, signposting expressions, because signposting essentially is about telling the listener where you're going. And if you use the question prompts as signposts, the examiner will know where you're going. But within the talk, once you've actually signposted what part of the question you're talking about, you've got things like listing expressions that will often be useful. So to begin with, then, finally, those kind of things you'll probably find yourself using. Giving examples. If you say something, I really like Spanish food, for example, and then you go ahead and you give some examples. So that kind of signposting is really useful. Yeah. Towards the end of the talk, if you feel that you've been speaking for long enough and the examiner hasn't stopped you, you might signpost that you're coming to the end of your talk as far as you're concerned, and you might use expressions like "so as you can see," or "so to sum up," or that kind of thing. So I'd say they're the kind of signposting expressions that you would probably use in everyday life, rather than the signposting expressions that you'd give in a formal presentation.
Right, yeah, because at the end of the day, it's more of it isn't the formal presentation, is it? It's more of a discussion almost.
Exactly.
Right then. Wow, this is great stuff, Pete. This is great. And just out of curiosity, how long have you been teaching for? This is great advice.
Well, I started. When did I start teaching? Probably about 1990 or 1988, 89 was when I did my first qualification, and then I taught for about, I suppose, 16, 17 years before leaving and setting up the business. And in a sense, I regard what I'm doing now as teaching. In a sense, it's a lot more one way, but I suppose from the beginning, about 20, 22 years.
Right then. And then when did you get started with that? When you said your business, that's Splendid Speaking, when did you get started with that then?
Splendid Speaking was in 2006. So that was 6 years after we started Flojo. So Flojo was in 2000. Flojo.co.uk or flojo.com is for exam students, FCE, CAE, CPE. And 6 years later, after lots of emails from students asking about speaking skills, we set up Splendid Speaking, which is splendid-speaking.com or just splendidspeaking.com.
Right then. And what's the main objective with those ones? What do you want the student to achieve from once they do your course, the Splendid Speaking course?
I think when I started Splendid Speaking, it occurred to me that many good course books teach students the words and the use of English that they need to pass exams, whatever they are. Because if you consider all exams really have a very similar format, whichever exam it is, whether it's CAE, FCE, IELTS, they have an interview section where the examiner asks nice getting to know you questions. There's usually a long turn where the student has to speak for a minute or two. The input might be different. It might be photographs instead of cue cards, but they still have to speak at length. And then there's usually more of a discussion stage, either between the examiner and the student or between the examiner and two students. But what struck me at the time was that although lots of courses and books, give students the English they need. What they didn't do quite so well or quite so often was give students the kind of strategies that a native speaker would be told to use. So, for example, the idea of using anecdotes or the idea of using something that's topical as a way of introducing your long term, for me, that's not something that appeared very often in books or courses.
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose, if in a nutshell, the objective was to give students the language that they need in order to do well, but to also give them some really useful strategies that they can take with them, not just for the exam, but strategies that they can use after their exam if they're in a meeting or if they're in a social situation or business situation, useful strategies that they can use.
Yeah, and supplying those strategies, it kind of leapfrogs the whole learning curve, because if you never learn those strategies or get taught them formally, it's going to take you a lot longer to develop them, because you're going to do it the long and more natural way, which is, yeah, so if you get the strategies delivered to you, and yeah, it's going to cut.
And I suppose also the interesting thing is that a lot of native speakers don't have those strategies. I'm sure we all know people that when you sit and meet somebody for the first time, you quickly get bored because all they do is talk about themselves. and at the end of that kind of chat, whether it's at a party or in a business meeting, you feel that you know their life very, very well, but they've gone away and they don't know anything about you. And I think so it's not something that non-native speakers need to learn. I think it's people generally benefit from these skills.
Yeah.
So instead of just talking about you, ask the person questions about them, and that way when the discussion finishes, they'll go away thinking that you were great because you were really interested in them. It's a positive impression.
That's a great point. I know exactly what you mean there. Just going back to those strategies that you were speaking about before, in your podcast, splendid-speaking.com, the podcast there, you go over some of the strategies, don't you? I think.
Yes. There's, depending upon the activity, it might be a long presentation, it might be a question and answer, but we'll focus on any of the strategies that are appropriate for that activity. There's also what we call a Get Speaking task sheet. Now, these task sheets are available each week on the website. So you download a task sheet, and on that task sheet is usually two activities, a presentation and a discussion. And linked within the task sheet, there's a link to one of the podcasts. So you can try the activities yourself, but you can also listen to a student trying the same task and listen to my feedback. So you'll find the Get Speaking task sheet. There's usually one a week, always one a week, a new one every week over 26 weeks. They only appear one at a time, whereas all the podcasts, all 26 podcasts, are available at any time on the website.
Right. Wow, that's interesting. Okay, and just two questions now. Which is the most popular podcast you've done? And I don't know, answer that one first, and then I'll ask you the next question.
The most popular podcasts, it's difficult to say because generally they all more or less get the same number of hits, because what we do is although they're all available all the time, all 26, each week over 26-week period, we focus on one. So each week when the student opens our newsletter, there's a link to, say, podcast 1. And then in week 2, there's podcast 2. They can always listen to all the other podcasts if they want to, but each week one gets promoted. And so over time, they all get more or less the same number of downloads.
I see.
I've got favourites. I've got one between Anna and Jonas, which I can't remember which number that is. But Anna was in, I think, Austria at the time. Jonas was in India at the time, and we met in Skype. It was late at night for me anyway. It was late at night when this podcast happened. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning. These two had never spoken to each other before, And they had a getting to know you interview. And I asked them to focus on active listening skills, so asking each other questions rather than just talking about themselves. And it was a lovely discussion. They really got on well.
Uh-huh.
They found out lots and lots about each other in the short time that we were online. And I think the warmth of the pair of them came across in the interview. It's a really nice discussion.
Wow, that's cool. That's cool. And you arranged that through the website, yeah?
That was through. Yeah, they got in contact with me. I put them together, and we met up a couple of years ago now.
Awesome, that's fantastic. And which is the most popular course that from Splendid Speaking?
There's up until recently, it was the Splendid Speaking course, which is a very generic course. It's really aimed at anybody at an upper intermediate advanced level who wants to learn some generic speaking skills, which can be useful in exams or in business or at university. But the next course we produced was which was CAE Speaking, because we have the Flojo site behind us, and huge numbers of students use Flojo. Then CAE Speaking became very popular as well very quickly because of the numbers of people that we had using Flojo that were doing CAE. Right. IELTS, we recently published a new course called IELTS Speaking Advanced, and that's growing quite quickly. We don't have the IELTS user base on Flojo that we have for CAE, so that's a slower process, but we're in the process now of promoting and marketing IELTS Speaking, and we hope that will be just as popular really as CAE. And then we have Get Speaking, which is not so much a course but a series of task sheets that we invite teachers to download. I mentioned these Get Speaking task sheets earlier. Each week we publish one for free, but if a teacher finds Splendid Speaking all of a sudden, downloads the Get Speaking task sheet and likes it, they might not want to wait 26 weeks to get all 26 weeks of the task sheet. So we allow them to purchase all 26 immediately if they want to, and that's quite popular with teachers.
Right then. And can you just tell me a bit about the IELTS course you've got? It sounds quite interesting.
Yeah, it's a 10-unit course. It's based specifically on obviously the IELTS exam. It covers the part 1, part 2 and part 3 of the exam, and it really deals with the kind of issues that we've been talking about. It goes through the language that the student will need for IELTS, gives them grammar and use of English vocabulary exercises. They get to listen to a sample of a student doing a part of the exam. So each unit there's a recording similar to the Splendid Speaking podcasts, where they'll listen to an IELTS student or a student at that level doing a talk, and they get feedback similarly to the podcasts. But each unit comes primarily with a lesson, and the lesson will again look at some of these strategies that we've talked about today, whether it's how to deal with the long turn or the part 1 or part 3 questions. So essentially it's that's IELTS Speaking Advanced.
Right, that sounds like a great course. Fantastic. Right then, well, we're approaching the end. That was amazing. Thanks a bunch, Peter. It was
really nice talking to you.
That was great, Pete. Thanks so much. It was fantastic.
Thanks for listening to IELTSPodcast.com. And remember to leave your email for updates and early access to new podcasts.